The gravel crunched under the sheriff's cruiser tires as it rolled up fast to where I stood. A woman in a bright pink visor was already out of her car, pointing at me with the fury of someone who had just caught a criminal red-handed. Her face was twisted with rage as she screamed that I was trespassing on private property. The two officers approached me cautiously, hands resting on their duty belts. The lead officer, a tall man with graying temple, spoke with authority. Sir, we're going to need to see some identification. This lady says you don't belong here. I reach slowly for my wallet, keeping my movements deliberate and calm. Officers, I on this land, I said, pulling out my driver's license along with another card. I'm Federal Judge Marcus Henderson. Transformation on their faces was immediate. The woman in the visor, who I would later learn was named Patricia Thornfield, but insisted everyone call her Patricia, not Pat or Patty, seemed to deflate slightly, but only for a moment. Their eyes narrowed as she processed this information, already calculating her next move. 3 weeks earlier, I had list on the ranch I'd been dreaming about for years. 40 acres of beautiful Texas hill country butting up against edge of rolling hills estates, an upscale subdivision known for having one of the most aggressive HOA. As in the state, I'd heard the stories, of course, of it. My property wasn't part of their jurisdiction. I owned my land free and clear with no deed restrictions or covenants. I kept a low profile, only visiting once a month to check on the property and meet with the contractor who was slowly renovating the old farmhouse. But Patricia Thornfield had other ideas. As president of the Rolling Hills HOA for the past 7 years, Sheryled her domain with an iron fist trapped in a velvet glove of foxbulletness. The first time I encountered her, I was unloading some supplies from a truck when she marched across the property line in a trademark visor and clipboard. Excuse me, she said in a voice that could cut glass. I don't believe we've met. I'm Patricia Thornfield, president of the Rolling Hills Homeowners Association, and you Ari. Introduced myself simply as Mark, explaining I'd recently purchased the Theranch. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes scanned my property like a hawk searching for prey. Well, Marcus, I'm sure he'll want to bring this property up to our community standards. That fence is looking rather shabby. And is that Alistock trailer? We have strict guidelines about commercial vehicles. It politely informed her that my property wasn't part of the HOA. The smile finally cracked, perhaps not officially, she said with a tone that suggested she knew something I didn't. But as neighbors, we expect a certain level of cooperation. He'll send you our guidelines for reference. She spun on her heel and marched back to her pristine white Range Rover, leaving me to wonder what I'd gotten myself into. The Harris-Menstered small official-looking notice sappered taped to my gate, citing violations of codes that didn't apply. Tummy property complaints to the city about imaginary livestock noises, even though I hadn't brought any animals to the ranch. Then came the letters from the HOA Saturday suggesting that there might be confusion about my property boundaries and that I should consider joining the HOA voluntarily to avoid any misunderstanding. Ignored it all, filing each document carefully in a folder marked Patricia's nonce. But Patricia wasn't used to being ignored. One morning I arrived at me ranch to find a large metal gate had been installed across the access road, complete with a shiny new lock and a sign declaring it private HOA property. Problem was this was a public easement that had existed for over 50 years. I called the sheriff's department to report the illegal obstruction, but Patricia had anticipated this. She'd filed a claim with the county that the easement had been abandoned and that they had assumed control of the road for security purposes. It would take weeks to sort out through proper channels, so I did what any reasonable person would do: cut the lock. That's when Patricia called 911. Screaming about a dangerous trespass destroying HOA property, which brought us to the current moment, with 12 sheriff's deputies trying to process the fact that they'd been called out tourist a federal judge for accessing his own land. Judge Henderson, the senior deputy, said carefully, I apologize for the confusion. Can you explain the situation? I gave them the short version while Patricia sputtered in the background about destruction of property and criminal trespass. The deputies examined me deed, made some calls, and confirmed what I already knew: the road was a public easement and the HOA had no authority to block it. Ma'am, the deputy turned to Patricia, you need to move this gate immediately. Installing it was illegal and you could face charges for obstruction of a public right of way. Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of purple. This is ridiculous, I know the law. My husband, an attorney. She grabbed her phone and started furiously texting. You'll be hearing from our legal team, the deputies made her wait while they supervised their removal of the gate, but Patricia wasn't done. Over the next week I was served with a lawsuit from the HOA claiming I had violated numerous covenants and restrictions, damaged HOA property, and caused emotional distress to the board members. The lawsuit was ridiculous on its face since, again, I wasn't part of HOA, but it would still require time and money to defend. That's when I decided to look more carefully at the Rolling Hills HOA documents. What I found was interesting, very interesting. The HOA had been formed 20 years ago, but there were significant irregularities in its founding documents. The original covenants had never been properly recorded with the county. The voting procedures used to establish the HOA didn't meet state requirements, and most damning of all, there were discrepancies in the financial records that suggestions were being misused. I recused myself from any potential case involving the HOA to avoid any appearance of impropriety, but I did what any citizen could do. I filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office and contacted several homeowners in Rolling Hills who I'd heard had issues with Patricia's reign of terror. The stories that emerged were shocking. Homeowners spent thousands of dollars for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. Elderly residents forced to appear before the board to explain why their grass was half an inch too long during a drought. A family with a disabled child threatened with liens because they installed a wheelchair ramp without getting the proper approvals, even though it was required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. One by one, homeowners came forward. A forensic audit revealed that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, disguising them as administrative costs. The HOA's attorney, well, happened to be Patricia's brother-in-law, had been billing at rates far above market value for routine work. Board elections had been rigged 4 years, with Patricia counting the ballot herself and destroying any evidence of opposition. When the subpoenas started arriving, the HOA board members began tapping Patricia's inner circle. Once so loyal, started distancing themselves. Board members resigned in droves, each own providing statements about Patricia's autocratic control and questionable practices. The woman who had terrorized a neighborhood for 7 years was watching her empire crumble in real time. Patricia tried to maintain her composure, showing up to board meetings in her signature visor and acting as if nothing was wrong, but the cracks were showing. Her hands shook as she called meetings to order. Her voice cracked when she read the treasurer's report, and when process servers showed up at her door with federal documents, her neighbors reported hearing sounds of hysteria from inside. Her usually pristine colonial case moved with surprising speed. The state attorney general's office, working with federal authorities due to mail and wire fraud allegations, built an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had the HOA been improperly formatted, but Patricia had been systematically drave homeowners for years. The misuse of funds alone totaled over $200. On a bright Thursday morning, the courtroom was packed with Rolling Hills residents. Patricia sat at the defendant's table, her visor nowhere to be seen.